Hi, my name is Mitch Mitchell, and most of you know if you watch my videos or even if you read my blog that even though I'm a healthcare finance consultant, I'm also very big into leadership. And I want to tell you, I I was pretty good at it. I'm pretty good at it. I think I am. I've written a couple of books on it. I've been evaluated pretty well. But obviously I'm not perfect. I mean, look at this. I'm not even sure if this color jacket goes with this shirt. I have no idea. My wife's out of town. And the only rule I have to fall back on is something my mother told me back in 1983, which was solids usually go well with solids regardless. That's the best I got. So, I use that not necessarily as a leadership thing, but as one of those things where sometimes you learn rules and you stick with those rules and you go by those rules, whether they're right or wrong. And I don't know. I think that right or wrong depends on your interpretation of it and the severity of it. I mean, the color, who cares? If I showed up at work in these colors, no one's going to gripe. Now, if I showed up as a consultant and I'm wearing a shirt like this without a tie or a collar, then that's a little bit of a different story unless I knew that that was the dress code wherever I was going. But, I like to talk about the good leadership principles, and I'm going to talk about some things that maybe they're good, maybe they're bad, but at least they're going to be honest. These are things that I myself have done. And I'm putting this out there because I don't want anyone thinking that I believe that I'm perfect in any way whatsoever. So here we go. This is 7 things. The first one was I actually had favorites. I'm going to own up to that. I had favorite employees. I think that if you don't have certain people that you gravitate towards that you think are, great workers, they're good people, then you're not really paying attention to everybody. Now, there's nothing wrong with having favorites. The people who put in more hours or the people you count on. For instance, if you're in a leadership position and you have supervisors, well, hopefully you're going to have a better relationship with those supervisors. It may even be a little bit more personal than you have with everybody else. So, there's nothing really wrong with that. What turns out being wrong sometimes if you use that against everyone else. So in other words, you're going to support your favorite person because you like them, even though they may be doing something that's contrary to what everyone else is doing. I will have this caveat and I will say the reason I had favorites is because they went above and beyond. They didn't slack off on their work. They didn't badmouth other people. They really worked hard. And, I'm one of those people who always believe that you appreciate the people who work harder. And maybe you give them a little leeway because they've proven they're not taking advantage of it. So, but I did play favorite. I had favorites. I'll just say that. Sometimes I missed signs of dissension. This is my number 2. I was pretty good at, evaluating people, but every once in a while, I would miss that there would be a couple of people who weren't getting along with each other. Now, to my defense, I wasn't always around everybody 24/7 or as it is, 8 to 10 hours a day. I might be in my office and I just pop out for something. And like most societies, whatever, you don't act bad in front of the person that's in charge if you can help it. Still, I like to have counted myself as one of those people who was a little bit more aware, but often I wasn't. And so sometimes I ended up having to deal with something that the supervisors couldn't even deal with because I hadn't noticed something. It happens, but I think that's kind of a failure. It means you're not totally paying attention to everything that's going on. Number 3, I sometimes didn't realize employees didn't know what the goals meant. Now that sounds strange until I'll just give you an example. In healthcare finance, you have this thing that you call a days in receivables. What that basically means is how long it takes for me to get paid once I send a bill out. So, I just always assume because this was a term we always used, days outstanding or days receivable, that everybody knew exactly what that was. I wasn't the first one to ever use this term on them. And yet it was one day in a meeting that I was having with combined billing departments, and I said this, and then I stopped and I said, okay, who here doesn't know what that means? Because I just got this feeling, all of a sudden. Turned out nobody actually knew. Well, okay, one of my supervisors did, but she didn't want to say anything at the time. But it turns out people didn't know what it meant. This was always our goal. This was a goal of every single hospital accounts receivable department, is to keep your days and receivables as low as possible. But they didn't actually know what that meant. That's my bad. It's also the bad of a lot of leaders who tend to believe that just because they're telling everybody all this stuff that they know exactly what it means. So that was a failure. So the next time is sometimes I was doing work that I shouldn't have been doing. This is number 4. Now, this always happens when I first go to a place, at least initially, because I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and so I will kind of immerse myself in things, and then I start basically doing other people's work. And the thing is, it's a great way to learn stuff, but it's a lousy way to do business. As a consultant, I can't always get away with that because I have to ask a lot more questions. I'm not in there for a really long term, at least most of the time. I don't know if I'm in there for a long term. So you're not really sure where things are, so you can't always afford to do that. But I remember once going in as an employee, as a director, and basically for 5 months I was doing the work of other people because I hadn't had time to train them. And after one night when I was at work until 11 o'clock at night, it hit me. You know what, Mitchell? If you train these people, then everyone will be happy. That's why you hired them to begin with, and then you won't be spending that kind of time out. Of course, those were the days where I was still single. If I'd been married, my wife would have killed me. So that's that. Number 5, I sometimes forced employees to do work they didn't want to do. Now, some people may look at that and say, oh, how horrible that is. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's just how it is. I mean, in the military, do you think all those people want to put themselves in line to get themselves killed by the enemy? No, but they have to do it. Someone tells them they have to go do these things, and you do it. Why? You do it because of the greater good. Well, it was the same with us. You know, sometimes I would have to tell someone, you know what, you're just going to have to do that. If there was a patient complaint about someone, you're going to have to write them a letter of apology. Or you're going to have to call them up and talk to them and do certain things. I mean, that's just how it was. Now, I wasn't one of those people who forced overtime on people. As a matter of fact, a lot of times we didn't have the budget to pay anyone for overtime. But I would tell people, you know what, you've got to get your work done. And either you got to figure out how to get it done, or you need to come sit with me and we'll figure out if you're up to the standard. Folks didn't usually have to do that because luckily I was smart enough to train my people really well, to bring in a lot of outside trainers, and we talked about it at monthly meetings. But occasionally you had to do something where you had to tell someone, okay, you have to do this. And they, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to. Hey, tough. This is part of the job. You know, they don't call it work because it's fun. That's what work is. Number 6, I sometimes allow personal feelings to get in the way of rules. And basically what that said is that when I was an everyday director, you didn't have the kind of liberal thinking that you have now, where if people are sick, you're trying to tell them, you look, stay home and get well. Don't bring all that in here. Well, back in my day, people got 3 sick days a year. And I thought that was pretty stupid because I was in healthcare, worked in a hospital. 3 sick days a year with all the diseases that are running around in this place. And then what do you do with people who have children? You know what? Kids get sick all the time. I had one of my employees had 5 kids. I'm supposed to tell her that you're only allowed 3 days a year? Yeah, that wasn't happening. So I basically violated the rules. If their kids were sick, I said, okay, go home and take care of your child. Get them well. Make sure you're not sick, and then come back. So I didn't count sick time against people whose kids were home. Now, they also didn't get paid for it. I mean, you could put in vacation time like that, and if they had it, fine. But they didn't get paid for it. This is before the days where you actually had that as a federal law. I didn't care. And I didn't worry about having to justify myself to anybody. Luckily, nobody ever asked about it, which was cool. You know, I was a director. They trusted me. I got more money in there, and we raised revenue. So they pretty much left me alone. But I just thought, are you kidding? There are some of these rules that you just can't follow. It was the same rule with telephones. I mean, the hospital rule was no personal phone calls. I'm thinking, are you nuts? And, so the ladies' kids get home at 2 o'clock, and you don't want the kids to call, or they can't call and check on the kids, or, make doctor's appointments, whatever. When are they supposed to do all that if they're working all day long? We didn't have cell phones back then. Believe it or not, people, we didn't all have cell phones back in the 90s. So, as a matter of fact, I didn't get my first one until 1995, and it was the old flip phone where you paid for every call you made unless it was after 9 o'clock. So who's using those things? So I'm just saying that sometimes I did allow the personal feelings to get in the way of business. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I hope that I didn't abuse it, but, sometimes you just have to go with your gut feelings. And the last one, number 7, I sometimes showed I was human. Now, for the most part, I tried to be pretty consistent. I tend to believe that consistent leaders, whether you're a blankety blank or whether you're a good leader or whether you're one of those people whose emotions can kind of swing back and forth, I tend to believe that most workers want someone who's at least consistent because you at least know what to prepare for. If you're one of those people who comes in one day and you're all happy and smiles and you brought donuts, and then you come in the next day and you're screaming everybody's head off because you haven't had your first cup of coffee yet, I don't drink coffee, I drink soda, but you know what I mean, then people will get confused, they're not really sure what to do, nothing ever happens. I think that's worse. If someone is bad all the time, at least now you know, okay, I'm going to go into the office, not going to talk to me, he's going to start yelling, blah, 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 and you get immune to it. But when you don't know what's going on, when you're not consistent, then that just freaks people out. Well, for the most part, I was consistent. But I had days where I woke up and I just did not want to go to work. So I walked in and I would be quiet. It happens sometimes. Or we would hear a story. You know, when you work in a hospital, if you have any kind of humanity whatsoever, sometimes you hear about something bad that has happened to a patient or maybe to a family member of one of the employees there. And if you don't show any kind of reaction whatsoever, if you can actually get away with that all the time, then you're a better person than I am. You know, now nurses and doctors pretty much have to learn how not to project that visibly. But you don't know how many of those folks end up going into the room later on to clean up and have difficulty with it, you know, when children die and such. So, you know what? Sometimes I showed that I was human. You know, I showed that a lot. You know, I showed when I liked certain things, and sometimes I showed when I didn't like certain things. I was, like I said, I was pretty consistent for the most part, but I tend to believe that you have to show people that you're not perfect, that you have a life as well, and certain things happen. You don't overdo it. I mean, if you're going through, you know, a divorce or a bad relationship, I don't think you intentionally share that stuff with your employees because, you know, now you're putting them in a position of, okay, I don't know what to do with this. I mean, it's the person I report to. Are they now trying to be my friend? Never be friends with your employees and don't be friends with the people above you. I'm just saying that. I mean, friendship should take a long time. But, you know, sometimes you just have to go ahead and follow the emotion and go with it. And that's just how life is. Anyway, those are 7 things that I'm sharing with you that may show I'm not a great leader all the time. I'm not a perfect leader. Or maybe they say, you know what, this guy may have something. I don't know. How do you define that? That's the purpose of the video. Let me know your thoughts. Hope you enjoyed it. Y'all take care. This is Mitch Mitchell.